So this is lesson 1 for IELTS Writing Task 2. In this lesson I'm going to explain what we're going to cover over the next few lessons on the video course for Writing Task 2. This is not going to be a typical English language course for IELTS. This is what I would call an IELTS training course. So what do I mean by IELTS training? Well, for me, training has 5 steps. The first thing is to understand what the task requires. So in this case, we need to understand exactly what is required in writing task 2, what we need to do. The second stage, after you've understood what is required, the second step, I think, is to break the task into parts, into smaller, more manageable tasks. For example, we'll have introduction, main paragraphs, conclusion, that kind of thing. So break up the task. The third thing to do in terms of training is to have a method for the different parts of the task. We need methods, techniques, so we can practice those and improve our skills. The fourth thing is to practice a lot, repeated practice of the same methods, the same way of doing things is how you improve. And finally, the fifth step is to get some feedback, which means in the case of writing task 2, you probably need someone to check your work, give you feedback on what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. By getting that feedback, you can measure your progress and keep practicing in a more efficient way. So those are the 5 steps that I would consider to be training. Going back to step 1 was understanding the requirements of the task. Well, the task we're looking at here is writing task 2. So what do we need to do? Well, you have to write an essay, a minimum of 250 words. There is no maximum. You can write as many words as you want, but the minimum is 250. Otherwise, you will lose some of your score. And it's suggested that you spend 40 minutes doing this task out of the 1 hour of the writing test. What do they ask you about? Well, they ask you about what I would call universal topics. A universal topic is something that everybody anywhere in the world should know something about. For example, family, health, education, work. They ask you a question about a universal topic, and they will ask you one of 3 or 4 main types of question. I usually say that there are 4 types of question. We'll come back to breaking the task into smaller parts in a moment, but first, a final thing about the general requirements, and that is, what is the examiner looking for? Well, the examiner scores your essay according to 4 criteria. Each of those is worth 25%. The first one is called task response. That just means, have you answered the question? If you write something that isn't really answering the question, you'll get a lower score. The second thing is coherence and cohesion. That basically means, is your essay well organized, logically written, and easy to follow. The third thing is vocabulary. IELTS examiners call this lexical resource, but it really just means vocabulary. And the final thing is grammar. They call it grammatical range and accuracy, but it's a grammar score. Now, I tell my students to focus on the first 3, to forget really about the grammar. You can improve your grammar only very slowly, in my experience, gradually reducing the number of mistakes you make. But I think you can improve much faster on the other 3 aspects, the other 3 criteria. So answering the question in a well-organized way and with good ideas, good vocabulary, I believe it's much easier to work on those 3 things. And that's 75% of your score. So that's what I'm going to focus on mainly on this course, in these videos. The last thing I want to talk about in today's lesson is step 2 of this training course. Step 2 that I described earlier is breaking the task into smaller parts. So if we take the number of words that you need to write in your essay, 250 words, have you broken this down into paragraphs and sentences? I think it's a good idea to do that. So for me, 250 words, a 250-word essay, the ideal number of paragraphs that I always try to write is 4. I always recommend to my students that they write 4 paragraphs. So that's what we're going to work on this course. How many sentences would there be in those 4 paragraphs in a 250-word essay? Well, for me, about 13 is the answer. Let me describe how that works. So, first paragraph is the introduction, and I suggest writing just 2 sentences for your introduction. Many people, in my opinion, make the big mistake of writing a long, complex introduction, and that doesn't do you much good in terms of your score. If you want a high score, you really need to focus all of your best work, your best vocabulary, most of your attention on the main paragraphs, paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. Each of those paragraphs I'm going to suggest 5 sentences. So 2 for the introduction, 5 sentences paragraph 2, 5 sentences paragraph 3, and finally the conclusion is very short, 1 sentence. So that adds up to 13 sentences in total. Short introduction and conclusion, and good main body paragraphs in the middle. That's the best way to write a 250-word essay. Of course, it might not always be exactly 13 sentences. It might be 12, it might be 14, 15. But I'm aiming for that. And certainly, I always do just 2 sentences for the introduction and just 1 for the conclusion. There's no need to do any more. If we do the same thing with the time, the 40 minutes that you get in IELTS for IELTS Writing Task 2, if we break down those 40 minutes, here's what I suggest. I tell my students to spend 5 minutes on their introductions, just 2 sentences, so we should be able to write an introduction in 5 minutes. Then for each main paragraph, 10 minutes. That's what we aim for, and that's what I try to train my students to do, to be able to write a good 5-sentence paragraph in 10 minutes. So 20 minutes in total for the main body, and for the conclusion just another 5 minutes. That could even include some checking time. That all adds up to only 30 minutes. 5 for the introduction, 10, 10 and 5. So we've written a full essay in for 30 minutes. Where is the other 10 minutes? Well, I put that on the beginning as planning time. 10 minutes of planning time. It does seem like a lot. Most people don't do any planning. Some people do a little bit of planning, but over the years of teaching IELTS, I've tried no planning, a little bit, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and eventually, surprisingly even, I ended up teaching people to do 10-minute plans. In the rest of these lessons on this video course for Writing Task 2, I'm going to be working on those things that I've just broken down. We're going to be looking at the introduction, the main paragraphs, the conclusion, planning in detail, how to do a good plan. And then we'll put it all together with essays for the 4 different types of question. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at introductions. I'll try to train you to do those 2-sentence introductions that I mentioned and be able to do them quickly in 5 minutes. Hopefully see you then.